Um, this year's festival is dedicated to D.A. Pennebaker, one of the great pioneers of observational filmmaking, along with his contemporaries Richard Leacock and Robert Drew and Albert Maysles and so forth. We have an award that we gave out yesterday, our Visionaries Tribute, called the Robert and Ann Drew Award, which is in recognition of a body of work of observational filmmaking, which went to the filmmakers behind American Factory, Julie Reichert and Stephen Bognar. Because we because this festival has a history with those filmmakers, and because we're dedicating this year's festival to D.A. Pennebaker, I want to start out by asking each of you to reflect on a film that that inspired you and was informative to you. And Stephen, maybe I can ask you to go first.
Certainly, Harlan County, USA was deeply moving to me. Everyone's seen that movie, right? Yeah, okay. But Barbara Koppel's other masterpiece from her early part of her career, American Dream, which is another verite film following years in a strike in Minnesota. She made it in the 80s. It's less seen. It also won the Oscar for Best Feature Doc. It is Shakespearean in its complexity, and that film and how she was able to follow clashing constituencies, clashing points of view, and weave it together, and you feel the anguish on both sides of this rending strike. That film has really stuck with me over the years.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that one, because as someone who grew up in Detroit, that film meant a lot to me in its portrayal of a Midwestern Union struggle. And this wasn't a plug, I promise you, but we have a new Barbara Koppel T-shirt downstairs, sold exclusively at the IFC Center, so you can wear your Barbara Koppel love with pride. Jehane, you started out working with Chris Hedges and D.A. Pennebaker on your first film, Startup.com. So maybe I'm tilting your answer by saying that, but I wonder if you can talk about your own, love of observational filmmaking that drew you in.
It really did come from studying their work and then having the opportunity to partner with them, which was really the greatest gift in the world, to be able to partner with people who were mentors. And I learned everything I know from them. They changed my life, and Penny not being around anymore is still a big hole, but I think he's in all of our hearts and our brains constantly. So I remember watching The War Room, and feeling like this is amazing that you can learn so much and be inside rooms that you would never ordinarily get to see, like a spy, and learn so much and at the same time be entertained. And I just thought, wow, to be able to make a life for yourself of being in rooms that you wouldn't get to be in and meeting people that you're excited by and intrigued by and learning about them and learning about stories and issues that you would never ordinarily be able to be in. It allows you to have a life of discovery, and they really inspired me with their films. And I would say Don't Look Back as well. I would spend when I made Startup.com, as you mentioned, with Chris and Penny, and many late nights in their brownstone on the Upper West Side and struggling over the edit and staying there late nights. And, you get frustrated and you don't know, the place that I would often look is on their wall of VHSs. They had, hundreds and hundreds of tapes, and I would go down and just stick one in to think about how did they start this one or that one, because the beginning of a movie, editing the beginning of a movie can be the biggest struggle. And I remember getting very stuck on Startup.com. So I think I would watch all of their movies while I was working there. And when I saw Don't Look Back, I felt like I was in a time machine. Really, like this is the heart of observational filmmaking, is when you feel like you're in the back of a car with Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, and you feel like you're transported back to that time. And I just thought that was the most incredible experience, and I wanted to do that.
before I move on to Feras, I wanted to take stock that in this 10th year anniversary of Doc NYC, when I look at Jehane, I remember an earlier film of hers, Rafia Solar Mama, was a award winner of our Visionaries Prize several years ago. And Rachel Lears, her previous film with Robin Blotnick, The Hand That Feeds, was an Audience Prize winner here at Doc NYC a few years ago. So it's wonderful to see this continuity after 10 years. Feras, you grew up in Syria. Your previous film, Last Men in Aleppo, was also an observational film. What, as well as The Cave now today, what gave you the feeling that should be the format of your filmmaking, of telling a story?
First of all, I'm honored to sit with these incredible people because they are well established, and I learn and inspire by their works so much. Jehane, her work is very inspiration in the Arab world, let's say. Actually, it's I've been normally there. I feel that observing, watching. I grew up as a shy child, watching all the time, listening. I have a 7 sister, 14 aunt, my mom, and I was couldn't say any word because all the time I have to listen. Was so much inspiration in my life, really to be all the time listening. But my mom, she was a very good storyteller. She's a Kurdish mother. She'd been suffering so much in a way. She didn't get her passport from Syria because the Syrian regime, as a lot of Kurdish people, as also as a woman, she couldn't work as a teacher to teach the children. So she lost a lot of things, and all the time I've been hearing how she's inspiring for me, telling me these stories, and I was watching her body language, watching how she used her hand, watching her reaction around her. Then I start to see documentary actually for a Syrian filmmaker called Omar Amiralai, which is he's mostly used the observation documentary, standing on this body language feeling to tell the story deeply of that, and that was also establishing in my mind a lot of feeling of how much powerful, when you put the camera, observing the behavior for the time, behavior to the event, and you can tell deeper story than you can imagine in this way. Literally, I've been in love strongly with the film Act of Killing. I feel that film about
Josh Oppenheimer's film set in Indonesia.
Yeah, exactly. And it's about the meaning of to kill someone and to feel proud about killing that. And that was upsetting feeling all the times, and to understand how much he's proud of the killing of the people and feeling he saved these people. Shuha also another example for survival story. Then that established in my mind a feeling of how I can tell stories about survival, but also about observing behavior through event times, because this is a situation in front of me and I have to react to this situation.
Rachel, the previous film that I mentioned that you did with Robin Blotnick, The Hand That Feeds, also an observational film about a union struggle of immigrant workers here in New York City, and now with Knock Down the House, again, you return to that as a big part of your storytelling. Is there a film that you took inspiration from?
Yeah, lots of films. I mean, I think that The War Room and Harlan County, USA, which have already been mentioned, were huge inspirations to me in terms of just the immediacy and gravitas of historic events, whether it's involving political luminaries or ordinary people, stories that really speak to the zeitgeist of the moment. I think those two films were certainly influential to me. But I also think back to at the time around 15 years ago when I was starting to make films, and there's a couple of films that come to mind from around that time, and I don't remember exactly when they came out. A film called American Movie about
Chris Smith's movie. Yeah.
yes, and On the Ropes, a boxing story. I'm
Brett Morgan and Nanette Burstein.
Yes,
A terrific, really underappreciated. I'm not even sure if it's in distribution right now, but if you have the chance to see On the Ropes about three young boxers in New York, take that opportunity.
Yes, so good. So both of those films, I think, combined an observational story arc with intimate interviews, and that I became really enamored of that combination, and just the added intimacy that you can get. I mean, there's a certain amount you get through building relationships, of course, and the observation itself, but I really began to love using interviews in the background under the observational footage, not foregrounding the talking heads, but usually leaving that out as much as possible. And I think even thinking back to it, those particular films, American Movie being the story of a sort of kooky filmmaker who was making a short and all of the trials and tribulations. It's a hilarious movie, also totally recommended. I think those films may have shaped my interest in quixotic yet heroic personal quests, which I have been following in the political realm of these David and Goliath stories for a few years now.
You fed into another question I had about technique in observational filmmaking, because when we talk about those early pioneers of Richard Leacock and Albert Maysles and Frederick Wiseman, a big part of their philosophy and philosophizing about the making of film was a big part of that era, was don't ask any questions, almost as a kind of rule, and I think that their thinking was when you asked a question, you were breaking a kind of wall, and you were making people self-conscious that a camera was watching them. If you didn't ask questions, it's not like you could be invisible, but you increased the likelihood that they were paying less attention to you, and so I'd like to I think that in several cases, maybe all the cases of these films, there is some combination of observation, but then also taking a moment to ask people questions to kind of fill out what maybe can't be observed. And I'd love to hear about your own practice in that. When you try not to intrude, when you do ask a question, and how you use that. Stephen, can I start with you?
Sure. I mean, watching, there's moments in like The Great Hack when Brittany talks directly to you all, and there's moments when she's just lost in her moment, right? And I'd love to hear, and Rachel, you're like breaking the fourth wall of like, ignore me and don't ignore me. When we were filming, we found that people, if you switch too much between like just, okay, I'm just kind of in observational mode, just ignore me kind of mode, and then you start asking a question, that it throws people, because then, and sometimes people lapse into like almost becoming a narrator of their experience, which is not good material. Okay, now I'm going to go talk to the boss about the conditions here. So I'm walking, and it's like, you don't have to tell me. I can see you doing it. You don't have to narrate. But we're cautious when we ask a question. We don't want to. We don't want it to lapse into like interview mode, and people pick up on your. I feel people pick up on your cues. If your sort of body language and your quietness is saying like I'm just in observation mode, people will pick up on that and go with you. But you can't. I find you can't switch too much. I don't know what y'all would say.
Yeah, I think it depends on the person that we're following, really. And I mean, I'll throw another, Chris and Penny Baker quote out there, which is just, become part of the furniture, right? And you've succeeded if you're just part of the furniture and they forget about you. And that's ideally absolutely where you want to get. And then I would say, well, when do you stop? Because these days go on. And Penny would be like, well, if you get bored, then stop. you know, like if you're shooting something that's boring you, then nobody else is going to find it interesting either. So that was kind of his message, which I took, and which makes a lot of sense. And in terms of turning and talking, you know, that kind of tended to happen when we were alone with the character and something would happen, and, you know, Brittany would just start talking with us about something that was going on that she was finding on her computer. So it's sort of, I guess you just let the most natural thing kind of happen. You know, I wasn't going to be like, I don't want to hear it, don't talk to me.
I guess especially when what you're observing is someone interacting with their computer as opposed to another human being.
Yeah, exactly. And
you're the other human being in the room.
And I think that times have changed too. I mean, looking back on Startup, you know, they had these huge cell phones, even, you know, still, and with the little antenna on the top, right? And so there was a lot less everything on Skype, everything on phone. You know, there was a lot on phones, but even more so now. But you know, watching what you did, really, like, I think it's just about people really getting used to you, because what you did to be able to stick with them when things got shitty, that doesn't happen unless you have the patience, and to be there from the very beginning and just to kind of wait it out. So incredible film.
Time is your ally.
Yeah, exactly. And your films always make me cry. And they're masterpieces, but they make me cry. They're so
well, it's make me
so
cry
beautiful.
all the time. Yeah. No. In my case, we live with the characters. We live them every day. We don't leave the place, like we live them like.
Your crews were living in that underground hospital too.
Exactly. I was in my case in the cave. We have like 2 crew working. I have a crew in Eastern Ghouta, and I was with a crew in Idlib. Idlib geographically under the bomb of Russian and the Syrian regime as well. We didn't know how they're gonna shape the film completely. So we was living in hospital underground all the times, and trying to see all the way, because we also, there's a responsibility of documenting the situations. It's not just like reflecting in the end to put it films, because we don't know if this is gonna end in the film or not. We have a responsibility of writing history, testimony in war crimes, and testimony in political situations in this way. And I think the most interesting things, how the subject behave for the event, for the time, for the emotional things that happening, because so much emotional things happening, how they reflect about it, what they behave after that. We following this situation, how they react, what kind of resistance they do exactly for that, because everything is pushing them. And I need to see was like, I want to see what kind of resistance, how they can find the hope in the middle of the crazy situation, how they can discover a new way to survive. And that's what's most interesting in their conversation, in their in daily way. Even like when we shoot, like my cinematographer shoot in Eastern Ghouta, which is sieged area, 500 hours, and I shoot in Idlib 500 hours, and I shoot with the subject when they move to Turkey 200 hours. So we have 1,200 hours, and I have to sit with the editor to find again the whole moment. So we have the first conversation about this, how those subjects they can survive, what the conversation about the surviving, what the conversation about finding tools to make them continue doing the next day, continue to the next day and dealing with the next day, how we can make the people feel normal in this situation with them, and identify them as a human being, not just as a victim. As well, identify them as a way of feeling that those people could be like an inspiration for surviving if something happening in our world. Like this was in Last Minute style and in the cave style. Yeah.
Feras, can I ask you, the interviews with Dr. Amani are so intimate. When you're saying you did those later in the process? Am I hearing that? When did you do those?
Which one?
the voiceover. We have a number of voiceover interviews with Dr. Ahmad. She's her inner thoughts.
Yeah, yeah. So the voiceover was later standing on her diaries, but the interview was with the BBC. We kept Dr. Amani. She was doing like couple of interviews for to tell about the situation for BBC and CNN and that. And we collect all of that and we try to pick up the best moment with her to reflect her personal story. And it's taken us a long time because she was scary about her family and about her personal information. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So Rachel, Stephen was talking about not knowing or having to make a choice between when you're following, when you're talking, and I wonder, when you were filming with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or the other women candidates in Knock Down the House, how you navigated that, or if you felt that as an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you do have to make those choices all the time. And for me, my background is in visual anthropology, and so I'm, in addition to the tradition of direct cinema and the idea of being a fly on the wall, I also have always been really interested in the Jean Rouch tradition of being a fly in the soup. And so I consider my approach to be kind of trying to balance those. Sometimes I'm on the wall, sometimes I'm in the soup. In general, I don't think that the subjects tend to forget that I'm there when what they're going through or what they're doing is more interesting than the fact that I'm there. But if they're just driving or putting on makeup in a hotel bathroom, it's kind of like a little bit more interesting or out of the ordinary that I'm there than what they're doing. So those are the times where they just start talking, and sometimes great stuff comes out, sometimes not so great stuff comes out, and I actually have to ask them to just do their activity for a few minutes so I can get sort of the storyboarded sequence that I know I'll need in the edit. But I do try to separate I don't do a lot of on-the-fly interviews. I try to separate the sit-down interviews. Those are the moments where we're really going to reflect on the more intimate details of how everybody experiences the process that they're going through. But I think in the moment through observation, it's a constant negotiation. I find that, I'm on the one hand, I'm trying to, I have to the interaction happens naturally by myself, oftentimes in small places, as I think you mentioned, Jehane, if you're alone with them, it tends to be hard to not interact in some way, but I think some of the best moments in Knock Down the House came out of those moments, and then other great moments come from the trust that you build during those moments by allowing yourself to be a human being, and maybe tell them a bit about yourself, or that doesn't make it into the edit, but you're still having that human connection, and then when the really important stuff happens, they allow you to be there, and they forget that you're present, and you cover it. And that's, the essence of the observational thread.
I totally agree with that. We're very chatty.
Yeah.
You don't hear our voice in the film, but we are yakking away all the time with people.
Yeah.
And I think we try to leave interviews till the end as much as possible, because if you start off with too many interviews, then people will just say in difficult moments when they really don't want to let you they don't really want a camera following them, they'll tend to be like, oh, well, I'll tell you about it later. And you're like, no, I want to be with you. So, yeah, so kind of like keeping the interviews till much later is very helpful in terms of saying, I know I really need to basically be there with you to observe.
At the same time, though, I've actually found that doing an interview early in the process can be it can be a good icebreaker. You just kind of have this format where I'm just going to ask you a bunch of really deep questions that might be even weirder for me to ask if I'm just filming you walk down the street. Right. So I find that I like to do both, like one at the beginning and at least one at the end, and sometimes more in between if there's time. But I think both of those strategies can be useful.
Yeah, I agree about this idea. Also, when I find the subject, I try to interview in the beginning and take everything from knowledge, from hidden story out, and the subject exhausted, and they don't have anything to tell, and then you start to be the norm things that I wanted, and then I get like what I want, which is like observing, feeling, and they don't care about the camera because they say like all the time when they look to us like, what do you want more? Like you said, like there's nothing more like to tell, because to tell everything. Like I ask him, for example, I asked Dr. Amani how she where she birthed, what their father told her like when she was child. Does her father was happy about her like when she burned as a girls, because also the culture thinks that I know how they react in this situation. So I get everything. Dr. Amani is exhausted, and as a woman I was like exhausted with so much information they give me, but to start to get to know how much I can tell this is visually, how I can reflect this is through like the behavior in the story. Yeah.
This kind of filmmaking, it depends relies upon being in the room when the moment's happening. It's definitely not the same if they explain to you the next day, oh, I found out that I became a congresswoman, or that's not quite the same as being there in the car when it happens. I wonder if you can talk about negotiating access and points when a door was being closed to you, or a point when someone looked at you and said, can you turn off the camera for this? And you didn't want to turn off the camera because you knew you needed that moment, and how you handled that, whether you succeeded or not.
I'm happy to talk about that. I mean, I'm sure we all have those experiences, but I find that I push a little more toward when I know we're getting close to the end. Obviously, in the beginning, I mean, it's always a continual give and take, and you have to respect the boundaries that people set. Otherwise, they're not going to keep inviting you back. And they can sign as many release forms as you want, but if they don't keep returning your calls, you're not going to be able to get into that room when you need to. So you have to respect their boundaries. And when you're working with people that are doing very important work that is important to them and important to their communities and the world even, you have to respect that. And if they tell you that your presence is going to get in the way of that work, that's a time to step back. That said, when I think you start to have an instinct with certain people about what are the things that they're nervous about, and is it really, like, yourself and your filmmaking, and like, is it really going to make a difference? Are you really going to be stepping on their toes? For me, a good example is the night of Paula Jean's election in West Virginia. I don't know if you noticed, when she's picking up the phone with Joe Manchin, she flicks a cigarette away. She did not want. She very occasionally, would enjoy a cigarette, and she didn't want me to film it ever. Understandably, fine. I respected that, but she went out to smoke the night of the election. I was just like, I'm just gonna go sit next to her with the camera because I don't know. She's just lost the election. Like, hello, I'm gonna sit. I don't know what's gonna happen. And phone rings, and I just started filming, and I knew I wasn't gonna not film. And pretty quickly, I realized it was Joe Manchin. I'm obviously going to keep filming. And then we work it out in the edit and try not to highlight the cigarette, but it is there if someone is looking really closely. In any case, that's a situation where I knew we weren't going to highlight that. That's not the point of the scene. But I think the greater value, to overstep that boundary that she had set, there was greater value in it that we could all agree on later. So sometimes you have to maybe push a little harder.
We were told, so we're trying to get into these executive meetings in the factory where the leadership is talking, and they're talking a lot about like how to stop the union, and there's some inside stuff, and some often we were told like not this meeting, not that meeting, and of course when you're told not this meeting, that's the meeting you want to be in, right? So we would say, look, we need to see you struggle. This is part of the story. What you're going through is part of this, and we've been filming you for like 2 years, and we need to see some of this, so please. And if we were told no, we would ask the next time. I mean, part of why American Factory has the scenes it does is because we were rejected again and again and again and again, but we always asked in a nice, Ohio kind of way, it would be really helpful to the film if we could film this. We even started saying like, well, could we film like part of it? Could we just film the beginning? And then if you're on the inside of the room at the beginning, the meeting gets going, and then you're in there way longer. Like at some point, someone says, "Okay, it's time for you to leave," but we had filmed like 20 minutes when we thought we might get 5 minutes, and that's one way, things happen. Now we were also very fortunate in that some of the meetings we filmed were in Mandarin Chinese, and some dramatic things were said. But because we are not Chinese, in a way, there was a comfort level among the executives to say things that were dramatic because we couldn't understand it, even though they fully knew we would translate it later.
Jehane, any experiences in The Great Hack or other films where you were told to turn off the camera and had to overcome that?
I mean, it's just all the time. I think really the thing is you just continue to just show up the next day and try to show people that you are committed to them and committed to telling their story, and and it's a weight of responsibility. And so I think when people feel like you're just going to continue to show up and then they can't get rid of you, they start letting you film more. But we've done that as well, where you say just the first 5 minutes, and then you find that 25 minutes in you're still there. Yeah.
Right. Well, didn't Karim fly to Thailand without knowing where he was going on the hope of hanging out with Brittany?
Yeah. So we were communicating with actually Kareem's in the room, but we were communicating with Brittany on Signal. And, she was in a very complicated position because she was being investigated. She just left Cambridge Analytica, and she, which had been behind Brexit and the Trump campaign. And ultimately, she was investigated by the Mueller investigation, a number of other investigations. She had to, she was in a pretty hairy situation. She was having all kinds of meetings that, if you watch the film, you'll see that she's somebody that was in a very complicated situation. And we felt she just, I guess, she made the decision to jump off the cliff with us and trust us. And it doesn't happen immediately. I think you get the crack in the door, and then as you continue to show up and as you continue to respect their boundaries and show a care for them.
I'm curious. Do you know more about what you think opened that crack in the door? Was it because she'd seen films by you and respected them, or you had an intermediary who vouched for you, or you just had an opportunity to give a really long motivational speech about why she should do this?
I think with Brittany, it was actually, it depends on the character, right? I mean, with Khalil and Startup.com, it was because I was his roommate, so he couldn't really escape. With Brittany, it was, I think we had this conversation with her where we had been obsessed with this topic. And Kareem especially had read every article about this topic and about what Cambridge Analytica was doing. And it wasn't very widely known at that time. It became a lot more widely known, but we started this film, it took lots of twists and turns, but we've been at this for 5 years. So at the time that we met her, she knew that she was in the middle of a very, very sort of serious topic. And I think that the fact that we had taken the time to really understand it and have a conversation with her where we had become educated about it, I think she respected that.
With Dr. Amani, actually, we have 2 rules. One rules the camera not stop her from doing what she do. The second, we should not touch victims because we don't know what kind of material used over the victims, like weapons. But we have my cinematographer was never experienced to work with a female subject. And they never experienced to work in cinema verite, on fly on the wall, or observing situation. They normally was photographer and doing like news piece. So I have like to deal with this situation with them, and I have to communicate with them. They normally, first of all, when we start, they send me like a footage, the camera moving from face of Amani to the male subject. Again, on the daily base, that's happening until I have every day we're like having conversation with Dr. Amani and telling her about like how we can together deal with this situation, because she knows they don't want to film her first. They all the time try like, what if we film this doctor? What if we film this doctor? We can follow him doing this and doing this, but we can't do that. I said like, actually you can do whatever you want with Dr. Amani, because she gives us the full access on her life, and moving that, it's you show her the disrespect in this way. So I have a conversation with Dr. Amani about this. She said like they don't film me, they go like to film that, because I asked her like how it's going on in this, there's something happening, you are happy, you're feeling not comfortable about this. So she said no, they don't film me today, and yesterday they was filming with that male doctor. So through the conversation we have, like we reached like this idea that she could kick them out of the hospital if they didn't focus on her. And I told them that, and they felt like they're threatening for their job. They couldn't do that things. And we start like to push this in the day. You said like, I told her I will keep filming. Do you feel like you are pressured when we go to her with the operation room, because there's specific things and specific victims with a specific way? She said no, push as you want, but the important thing is not the camera not stopping me like from doing what I do. That was like she gave us the full access. Actually, the camera also helped her like to gain the respect from the society. The society started to scare from her, because everything is like being observing, and everyone like start to look what's going on and what they have to do. Everyone like start to be more respectful and more like way like, okay, this is dangerous for them. So the camera like build what's called this is circle of respect around this woman that walking, and everyone say like this is dangerous. So no one like managed to show a lot of behavior when they saw all this, the 2 cameras, 3 cameras in that, especially in Idlib. When she came to the Idlib when I was filming, there's Al-Qaeda in Idlib. And Al-Qaeda is, like there's no game with them in the way. There is no negotiation with whatever you do. Like you have to be undercover, she have to be undercover, we have to work in this situation. And I was filming, and I was like a little bit knowing in this way, if they also get me, I could be like making a problems for that. The situation there was like when we was filming here in Idlib, in one of the hospital in Idlib, after 3 days they sent car bomb and destroyed the hospital. From that, it was like for them the cameras was dangerous, and in other situation that build the respect, very powerful respect, and that what we managed to help us actually to establish this like a powerful visual style. That because how she react, how she behave, how she deal with the situation is calm, powerful, a way like make everyone like feel like safe, and this is way, and this inspire us like to put all of this way in the whole way of the style of the filming.
I want to open this up to the audience to ask questions. Right here, I see a hand going up. We'll take in the gray sweater first.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. This is incredible. I wanted to ask your personal philosophies on relationship building, both on and off camera, and especially for observational. Do you try to keep it as much on camera as possible, or are there times that you need to work behind the scenes? I'm just thinking, like, God forbid they say something off camera that you wish they had said on, and would love to hear more.
So the question was about building relationships with your subjects. Do you try to do everything on camera, or do you take time when the camera's off to build up a rapport? And do you fear that there's going to be a moment when you're building that rapport that they say something you wish you had the camera rolling?
Well, I always take time up front and throughout the process off camera. It's really important to me, and I can't imagine working another way. I'm sure people do, and that's but I'd be interested to hear how everyone else does it. But for me, that's essential. Especially in the beginning, I have to explain what I'm doing, and in order to get access, there's a lot of conversations about. I have to have some initial conversations about who these people are and what they're up to and what makes them tick. I don't want to go too deep. The pre-interview, you don't want to go too deep because you obviously want to get to some of that stuff later. But I think those conversations are important for establishing trust. And then, there's always going to be stuff that happens off camera that's not on camera, whether you're there or not. Sometimes you can facilitate it happening again or being said again, and sometimes it can't. I mean, to me, that's part of why I make documentaries, is the limitations are part of the process, and there's always going to be those golden moments that happened off camera that you don't have, but the overall, you can building that trust is worth it to then be able to be in the places you need to be later on.
Rachel, would you go to bars with Corey and Amy and Paul Jean and AOC?
Well, maybe with Amy a little bit more than the others, but yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say we had like a serious social. It was more just like. I think it was more of a collegial. We're entering into a partnership to do something that is kind of professionally motivated by both of us. We would have, as time went on, I think I go to a lot more bars with Amy and Corey now on this sort of publicity circuit than I did during the previous side of it, because they have the most time at the moment to do that. But in any case, I mean, I think it was more of a sense of like, well, this is what I'm all about. Let me hear a little bit more about what you're about. Are you interested in participating? What's that going to look like? And then as we're checking in, I would do a lot of check-ins over the phone, just to even figure out what we're going to be filming, what's happening, when should I plan to be there, et cetera, et cetera.
We had people in American Factory came over to our house repeatedly for dinner. We would cook for them and show them Julia's garden, my partner Julia. We would go to their house and eat. We would go out to restaurants. We would go to bars. There's one moment when one of the younger Chinese folks who's in the film, Leon, who is at the beginning of the movie, he's singing a lovely song to his wife, Lin Yan. We went to bars several times with him, and there was one night when we've had some whiskeys, and Leon is expressing a lot of interest in trying weed, American weed. I mean, he'd never smoked pot. And we had this really intense, quiet, like, looks at each other, like, is this okay? Can we get high with Leon? Is this appropriate? Is this going to cross a line? And we ultimately did not, because we really liked Leon, but if word got around that we were getting high with, in Ohio it's still illegal, with someone who's, from the Chinese side of the factory, it could have had repercussions to the larger film, and so we ultimately got cautious about it. So, but hanging out with people is essential.
Yeah, definitely.
Was drinking tea.
Drinking tea.
Yeah. Culture difference. It's so cool to drink tea, because tea also, like, in my culture, is something very good, like to have like negotiation and things. And personally, I drink, but Dr. Amani don't drink. So like, the tea was like a kind of give me to tell me to tell you. This is the way, like we say it in Syria, tell me to tell you. So there's a lot of this conversation. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. About your father, about my father, about my mother, about my mother, and this is where like turned to be like like school kids conversation that each other from long time. Yeah.
All right, I see some hands up. I'm going Francesca Triani, who's made the film Paradise Without People about Syrian refugees. It's premiering on Sunday. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, I had a question that I wanted to start out with Jehane, and maybe others could also address it. I've been thinking about the Great Hack for weeks, and it really stuck in my head for a long time. And one of the scenes that I really love is when we first meet Brittany, and she's in a bathing suit in the pool, which I think is also the first time you met her, or the first interview you had with her. And to me, that sounds like a nightmare scenario for an interview, right? There's water, she's half naked, like. I wonder if you could talk about how to turn a challenging situation to an opportunity for something revealing. Because when I saw that, I was like, what? Like, I can't believe they actually interviewed her in the pool.
Did everyone hear the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did everyone hear the question? That the first time you meet Brittany, she's in the pool. Actually, I'm not the best person to answer this question because I wasn't there. Kareem, my partner, was there, so perhaps he can answer it. But from what I understood, they basically arrived. She said, I mean, you have to understand that this was somebody that, we had conversations with over Signal. We really didn't know what we were getting into. She said, come meet at this, go to this location, land at this airport in Thailand, and I'll give you instructions from there. At the time, the people that were sponsoring her time in Thailand were these Bitcoin broken tooth. Where were they? Yeah, Macau gangsters. I mean, it was a very we didn't know
Sounds
exactly. We didn't know exactly who we were dealing with, and we have 3 little kids, and so for the first meeting, I was like, okay, Kareem, you take the flight, and I'll make
Mother
sure
will
that
stay home.
that one parent stays alive. And so he flew to Thailand, and then ultimately met at this location, and apparently they started talking, and she started talking about all of this stuff, and it became very interesting, and it became, the one thing that I think you never know, but most of the time, the first time somebody really explains something to you is really, and it starts talking about it, if you ask them to repeat it, you can never ask them to repeat it. So that's when they basically turned on the camera, and that's why that conversation in the pool happened. But yeah, I think it's about turning these situations. I mean, I love that it's filmed in the pool now. But it was kind of an odd place for our first interview. Do you have anything to add to that since you were there?
Started talking in the pool, and I was with our DP, the sound guy, and we said, well, let's just, it was the first time to shoot with this DP and sound. We all met in Thailand there, none of us knew each other. And the thing I'd say is when you're shooting something sensitive, you don't know when the last day of your shoot is. So every day you have to treat like it's potentially your last day. And
So true.
You have the ability to get it, you just gotta get it.
Shoot every day like it's your last day. That's
Shoot every day like it's your last day. That's exactly right. So, I mean, I'll tell you a funny story. When I was first shooting Startup.com, I shot everything because I was so terrified that I would miss anything. And I was working with these legends of cinema verite, and I was just like, if I miss something, later Penny said, and I think he said it in an interview that I heard too, but, you make these films, you miss, 90%, and you make these films with the 10%, but that's better than 0, right? And so that sort of gives you a calm, right? But I remember at the beginning shooting, and I was using this camera that I couldn't quite get up to shoot, at Khalil and Startup.com's level. And so a lot of it was sort of up this direction, and Ricky Leacock came over one day and was looking at the footage and tells Penny and Chris, you can't use this girl to shoot your movie. Like, all of this footage is up his nose. The whole movie is going to be up their nose. And, very generously, Penny and Chris totally ignored him and allowed me to continue shooting. But, that defines them as this kind of like defiant optimism, I think, that Penny had. But you take advantage of the moment, and that was shot that way, and you figure it out. And I think ultimately, if you're there at the right time, you get this, you get the story. And it's a lot of patience, and it's a lot of shooting in kind of non-ideal situations, but you make it work.
Take one more question in the front row here.
Hi, thank you so much. Rachel, I have a question question for you. I got to see Knock Down the House at the San Francisco Film Festival at the Casa Castro. It was amazing. Everybody in that audience, and myself included, was just gasping at that moment that Thom refers to in the film, where you're in the car with AOC and you turn the corner and it becomes pretty apparent that things are going well that night. And it was a really, obviously your film took so much pre-production. You're following 4 different candidates all over the country, and yet that moment just seemed to be so alive and dynamic and unscripted, and so, just so alive and jubilant. Was it that way for you? I mean, when you were shooting, were you thinking this is happening in real time right now, and I'm feeling this, or were you just, what was going through your mind at that time?
Well, it's a bit of an out-of-body experience, and it's a lot like, I think, improvisational music performance. I mean, you're trying to take in what's happening. Obviously, there was a lot of pre-production that went into that night in particular. A lot of conversations with her team about where is she going to be, what's going to be happening, what's the window, when are the results coming in, what do you expect, et cetera, et cetera. We had myself in the car with her on camera and a second camera in the bar. So that was, it ended up being a very wonderful scene to edit. It was practically in real time, the way it came out. But I would say in the moment, it's very much sort of this hyper-focused flow experience of just trying to understand what's going on and get the shots that you need and continue thinking about your coverage. And at the time, I wasn't thinking like, oh, I have a second camera. This is just going to be, we'll edit this in real time. I was like, I still have to get my coverage. And luckily, the other cinematographer, David Sampliner, was doing the same thing, and we ended up really having a good sense of where each other was and getting the complementary angles through that.
Feras and Stephen, to finish this off, let me ask you to pick a scene in each of your films that you are so pleased that it came together the way it did.
Well, I want to say first, I think that analogy's genius. It is like improvisational music. It's like jazz. It's because it's about responsiveness, right? It's about being alive in the moment with things unfolding and just knowing or feeling when to do that. We watched yesterday. Julia and I watched that famous shot in the movie Primary, where the camera follows JFK into a Union Hall, and apparently shot by Al Maisels, and he has to hold the camera above his head because it's just a swarm of people glomming onto Kennedy. There's one moment when the camera pans away from Kennedy to the faces on the side. And everyone's like just looking at Kennedy. And you realize oh, you got to get a cutaway, right? And yet there's no cuts in the shot. You see this 1 minute long shot, and it's one frame until halfway through. It pans over and then pans back, and they didn't cut it. There's no jumps. It's just flowing, but you still have to think about the potential for those cuts. I'm very proud. In American Factory, there's a grand opening scene where the factory launches and the chairman makes a speech, and then, to everyone's surprise, a United States senator, our Senator Sherrod Brown, gets up and says, there's people fighting for a union in this factory, and I support them. And it's like a huge, a stink bomb thrown in the party. And we had Aubrey Keith, our youngest camera person, was following the vice president of the company and had these amazing angles on him as he hears the senator saying all this pro-union stuff at this grand opening. And she hung on him perfectly as the vice president starts cursing. He says, fuck him to the United States senator, and later says, I'm going to cut the senator's head off with scissors. He was joking, but he was mad, and that's a moment where I feel like, and we had lots of other cameras that day, but that's a moment where the pieces all came together to make a really memorable scene.
When we call it in the editing room, the angry customer, the man who is coming. We laugh all the time about that. The man when he's coming is even upsetting when the man coming and try to come like a father of children, they are suffering from them. from the hangar. So it's like coming to Dr. Amani, who confirmed her like that she's not she should go back to the home and should not work, and because she's a woman. There was like
So even though she's saving lives in his community,
Yes.
he feels
saving
like
his life,
the-
saving
his own life. The thing to do is to lecture her that she should be home.
Exactly. She was saving lives of his children, not just time, many times. It's this is a lonely place where they save their lives, and he was questioning her, and was like hard to capture those moment because they are upset when they was like being captured on the camera. So that one of them proud moment, like we feel like this is great.
Well, I hope you have the chance to see all of these films if you haven't already. American Factory is playing tomorrow night at 6:15. The Cave is playing tonight at 5:45. The Great Hack plays on Tuesday at 6:15, and Knock Down the House plays on Monday at 8:50. Also, there are some other panels coming up later in the week that touch upon some of these films. Tomorrow, in our editing panel, Rachel Lears will be here with her producer and editor Robin Blotnick for Anatomy of a Scene, breaking down some scenes in Knock Down the House. And on Sunday, for a cinematography panel, Feras will be here talking about some of the imagery in the cave. And lastly, on Tuesday, for the Composing and Sound Design Day, there's a case study on The Great Hack, which if you've seen The Great Hack, you know that it has a very sophisticated sound design. So thanks especially to people who've been here for all four panels today. Like I said before, there's a happy hour that's going to begin at 4:30 up at Cinepolis if you want to move up there. I hope you get to see lots more panels and films over the next 7 days of Doc NYC. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks especially to Rachel Lears, Feras Fayyad, Jehane Noujaim, and Stephen Bognar.
And thank you, Thom.
Thank you, Tom.